Welcome back to Journey of Self-Awareness, your YouTube channel for personal growth and self-exploration. Today I'd like to continue this little discussion we've been having about spiritual practices by discussing a very powerful and profound practice or genre practices, and that is making offerings to the divine. People all over the world make offerings to the divine. You see this very often in Southeast Asia, and I'll provide several examples during the video. For example, we'll talk about offering practices in Bali and Thailand. If I have time, I'll also discuss mandala offerings in Tibetan Buddhism, which is extremely profound practice. And I'll also offer an example from the shamanistic traditions of the Peruvian Andes, which is a beautiful offering practice. I've been dividing our discussion up into genres of spiritual practices, and I think I mentioned in the last video that very many of these practices might fit into more than one genre, or some practices would represent multiple genres, or some genres might contain practices from other genres, and so forth. And this is no exception, because offerings can be seen as devotional practices, reverential practices, but they can also be seen as practices that involve renunciation and surrender. And this, of course, was one of the genres that I talked about in a few videos ago or so. Offerings, of course, can include physical objects like food or flowers or incense, or even symbolic objects or actions like lighting candles, or in many cultures in Southeast Asia, you'll go to, particularly in China, you'll see people with incense, burning incense and offering incense at temples. And offerings, of course, or these gestures, serve as an expression of devotion, of gratitude for blessings that we've received in our lives. They're an act of reverence and devotion, and, as I mentioned, even surrender. In many spiritual traditions, offerings are also symbolic of relinquishing our attachments to the physical world and our desires, or they may be gestures of humility and respect, and, as I mentioned, surrender or renunciation. For example, in India, in Hinduism, offerings, which are called puja, are often made to deities to seek their blessings and to express thankfulness and gratitude. In Buddhism, offerings are reverential acts. Often people will make offerings of flowers, candles or butter candles, incense, and so on, that are meant to honor the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings, and to honor the Sangha, the community of followers and believers and practitioners of Buddhism. And in Christianity, the practice of tithing a certain proportion of one's income, for example, is often seen as a form of worship and trust in the divine and in the will of God. Now, I've been fortunate enough to travel to Bali. I've been there several times now, or a few times now. And Bali is, of course, a very interesting and unique place. It's a Hindu island in a predominantly Muslim country of Indonesia. And Bali is a place where spirituality is infused in everyday life. It's ubiquitous in everyday life, and you see evidence of spirituality everywhere you go in Bali. It's, for example, if you visit Bali, you will see offerings everywhere. And you have to be very careful where you step, because they're so common and so widespread that you can very easily step on offerings that have been placed on the sidewalks outside of businesses, for example, and so on. And it's just something you don't want to do, because these are sacred objects, of course. And as we proceed through the video, I'm going to show you some pictures of offerings and offering practices that I took while I was in Bali to help illustrate some of the things I'm saying today. As I mentioned, Bali has a deeply spiritual culture, and offerings are everywhere, even on the hood of cars, which is something you also see in Thailand, which we'll talk about in a second. So in Bali, people very often get up very early in the morning, as early as 4:30 in the morning, to make offerings that they're going to make during the day. This is something they do every day. And the little offerings that they make are called Canang Sari. And they make these offerings to honor the divine, to maintain a balance between the physical and the spiritual worlds. This is a common element that you'll see in other traditions, which I'll talk about in a minute. And they make offerings to express gratitude for the blessings that they've received in their lives. And in fact, they'll make these small, simple offerings, sometimes several times a day, and they'll refresh them several times a day, and they'll typically place these offerings at household shrines. Every home in Bali has, or every household complex, I should say, has a shrine. The Balinese typically live in large extended families, so there may be multiple nuclear families living in the same kind of a compound, and they'll have a temple. Every banjar or neighborhood has a temple. Every town has its own temple, and then there are large regional temples that are seen to belong to the entire nation of all Balinese, and which are all believed to be more powerful perhaps than others, but these are all locations for presentation of offerings. The Canang Sari are often made of like palm leaves, and they'll contain flowers and rice and incense, sometimes little cups of soy sauce, and of course each element in the offering has a symbolic meaning. For example, flowers represent the divine, rice signifies sustenance and abundance, and incense then also serves as it does in other spiritual traditions, it's a bridge between the sacred and the profane and the sacred, between the physical realms and the spiritual realms. Now, as I mentioned, every Balinese family has its own temple or shrine, which serves as a place for daily offerings and rituals that are dedicated to their ancestors. The Balinese believe that their ancestors are present with them, and they worship and respect their elders, their ancestors. And so each morning, Balinese families will place offerings, which I mentioned will include flowers and rice, which is seen as a form of God. Rice has its own God. Incense and other symbolic objects and items in their household shrines, but they also will place them on the sidewalks and in the dashboards of their cars and in the front of their businesses and elsewhere, so that you see them everywhere you go. If you visit Bali, you will know what I mean. So they, of course, will muster a sense of reverence for the divine when they're placing these offerings, and they'll often be accompanied by prayers and gestures of respect, and they'll invite the blessings of the divine and protection for the family and for the family home. And in a sense, then, offerings are a devotional act, and that also create sacred space. And they're a powerful way of integrating spirituality into their everyday lives, so that their everyday lives, as I mentioned, are infused with spirituality, with a respect and reverence for the divine, and with the more noble sentiments, gratitude and feelings of generosity and well wishes for the world and so on. In fact, right now while I'm recording this video, it's during the Hindu high holy days of Canang and Galungan, and I was in Bali during this period of time, which comes every 210 days because of their calendar. They don't have the same calendar that we have, but during these times of the year, then, they make very more elaborate offerings, and that'll have very intricate arrangements of fruits and cakes and flowers and even animals. And while I was there during Galungan and Kunangan, I saw very large public processions of people carrying large towering offerings on their heads, and they're on their way to the local temples. And so I'll show pictures so that you'll see what I'm talking about. Now, I should mention that offerings in Bali are not just material gifts to the divine or to a god, for example, or to the gods, because the Balinese believe in a pantheon of divine beings. But these are spiritual gestures, symbolic gestures that reflect their intentions, their sacred intentions or spiritual intentions. It's through these offerings that the Balinese people acknowledge the interconnectedness of all things, that they express feelings of humility, that they propitiate themselves before the divine and seek to maintain balance in the universe as a whole. They seek to maintain balance between the physical realms and the spiritual realms. So the act of creating and presenting offerings then encourages mindfulness. It's a very prayerful act, and each offering is crafted with a great deal of care and respect, and their offerings are infused with spiritual significance, as you'll see from the pictures that I'm showing you. So for the Balinese then, making offerings, it's a spiritual duty that they do every single day. And regardless of one's profession or your social status, it doesn't matter if you're a member of royalty or not, everyone engages in these reverential acts of making offerings to the divine. And by doing so, the Balinese believe that these acts of making these offerings ensure their own personal well-being, they ensure the well-being of the community, they contribute to harmony in the neighborhood and in the community. And as I mentioned, this act of making these offerings fosters a strong sense of devotion, of discipline, even if it's an enthusiastic discipline, and they strengthen a feeling of connection to the divine. This is one of the main benefits of making offerings, and you may not want to do this in your spiritual practice, but if you want to look up offering practices, I recommend them, and I think that they're incredibly valuable because they help orient our focus and our attention on the divine and on what's important for our lives. So, as I mentioned, you'll see these similar offerings throughout Thailand, even though Thailand is principally Theravadan Buddhist. They're not Hindus, or they're mostly Theravadan Buddhists. And just as in Bali, making offerings is an integral part of everyday life in Thailand. The Thais have spirit houses. What they call spirit houses are usually kind of tall. They look like columns almost, but they're elaborately decorated and carved and very intricately carved. And you'll see them everywhere. Almost all businesses will have one. For example, in the large hotel I stayed at in Bangkok, there was one in the car area out front where you'd pick up and drop off passengers. Off to the side. It was a fairly large and elaborate spirit house, and the Thais will make offerings at these spirit houses, but also that you'll see them elsewhere, like I say. And in fact, in Thailand, I saw offerings that were woven out of like banana leaves that were draped across the hoods of cars, and I suspect probably as a means of seeking protection from the divine while you're driving in that horrific traffic that they have in Bangkok. It's like the traffic jams are, as you can imagine, are really quite bad. And so the Thais will make offerings every day as a way of expressing devotion, and they seek blessings, and they also do it as a means of maintaining harmony between the human and the spiritual realms. Offerings are also made at temples, of course, and there are temples in Thailand everywhere. Buddhist temples with Buddhist statues in them, and they make offerings at temples as a way to honor the Buddha and the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings, and the community of monks and followers, the noble Sangha. So it's a way of showing respect, of honoring your traditions, it's also done as a way of accumulating merit, spiritual merit, or positive karma, as I've called it. And it's also seen as a way to express one's intentions in a positive manner, purify the mind or your thoughts and your emotions, and to cultivate positive karma for this life and for future lives. The offerings you see in Thailand are deeply symbolic acts that reflect respect, gratitude, and one's spiritual aspirations. It's a way of cultivating mindfulness and detaching oneself from your material attachments and your wants and desires. It's a way of focusing one's attention on the divine rather than on the mundane. So I should mention that in both these traditions, of course, offerings are not seen in a transactional way. It's not that you're giving away something to the divine. It's these are acts of faith, of devotion, and of humility, and they're designed to nurture our inner qualities, our higher ideals, and like compassion and generosity, as I mentioned, and patience and humility and reverence and respect. And So these offerings that you see everywhere in Thailand, they create an atmosphere where the sacred and the secular coexist. They bring the mundane material reality of our lives and into the sacred and bring them together and in a very important and meaningful way. So in these examples, we can see that offerings actually serve multiple purposes. It's a way of expressing our love and reverence and devotion to a higher power or a deity or a transcendent principle, if you will. It helps us to seek union with the divine and cultivate a deep personal relationship with a higher power, whether you think of that as God or as the universe or the source or some transcendent reality. I often use the term the divine because it encompasses all of these things. By focusing our attention on generosity and gratitude and compassion, making offerings helps break down our ego. It counters our selfishness, our egocentrism. For example, in some offering practices, you give away the entire universe. You give away everything, yourself, all of your possessions, your body, everything. All of the beautiful things that possibly exist in the world and in the universe and even in multiple universes, you give it all to the divine as an act of reverence and devotion and respect. And this helps us overcome our own selfish ways, our own egocentrism, and our own self-aggrandizement and arrogance. So offerings very powerfully help us reduce our clinging and our desires and our attachments. This is one of the purposes on why offerings can be so powerfully effective. I guess I should mention that there are at least a few kinds of offering practices, which I've probably alluded to several times now as we've talked. In one form, one cultivates well wishes for the well-being of others. Another helps us acknowledge the abundance of the universe and the abundance in our lives and the blessings that we've received, and they help us express gratitude for those. And another form of offering practice, we give away and surrender everything to God or to the divine. As I mentioned, we give away all the finest things in the universe. And these help us focus, of course, on what's really important on a spiritual path and instead of focusing on ourselves so much. Of course, this is a form of renunciation, which is often referred to in spiritual teaching, which I've talked about many times on this channel. This is an act of voluntarily giving up or letting go our worldly attachments, our desires, and our ego-driven impulses and pursuits, and instead focuses on the pursuit of higher spiritual ideals and goals. It involves relinquishing our material possessions, our emotional attachments, and our strong sense of identification with the egoic self in order to attain an awakening and liberation, in order to transcend the self and merge with the divine. It's a way of seeking union with the divine so that we are one with God. In addition to the practices I've already mentioned from Bali and Thailand, there are some beautiful offering practices from other places in the world. One of them is the Despacho ceremony, which is now quite popular in the West, but was traditionally practiced by descendants of the Incans in the Peruvian Andes, highland Andes, and now you'll find the Despacho ceremony in communities around the world. Like I say, it's become quite popular. And this is Despacho in Spanish means offering. I'm going to just talk about the Despacho ceremony in a more general sense because the actual practice is quite detailed, and of course it depends on who's leading the Despacho ceremony because they're serve different purposes and different intentions, and so they're all unique depending on who's leading it, often led by a shaman or a healer from a local community. And Despacho ceremonies are sacred rituals that are practiced as acts of gratitude, as acts of reciprocity, ways of interacting with the divine, and ways of expressing reverence for often the Pachamama, the Mother Earth, the spirits of the mountains, the winds, and other spiritual entities, and deities of nature, for example. Despacho ceremonies serve as a way also to harmonize and balance the energies of the individual, the community, and the natural world, so that we live in harmony with nature and with ourselves and with our neighbors. So these Despacho ceremonies are usually conducted, like I say, by a shaman or a leader. There will be a group of perhaps up to a dozen individuals involved. Everyone in the group interactively participates in creating the Despacho, and the leader usually begins by creating sacred space. For example, they may call in the winds and the spirits of the four directions to help them create a sacred space. And they will begin also by declaring the intention and purpose of the Despacho ceremony, which may be to ensure harmony, as I mentioned, or express gratitude and thanks for the blessings in our lives, or to manifest personal or collective intentions, or to seek guidance from the spiritual realms. There's often also a great deal of flexibility in Despacho ceremonies, so that individuals are allowed to express their own personal intentions, and they don't have to verbalize these out in public, although they may. But during the Despacho ceremony, for example, individuals will infuse their intentions into the ritual objects that are being placed into the Despacho. So in addition to fostering and maintaining a harmonious relationship between the manifest and the sacred worlds, then, Despacho ceremony is also fundamentally an expression of the interconnectedness of all things, of all of life. For example, I've heard shamans say things like, this Despacho is a celebration of thanks that gives us an opportunity to reaffirm our relationship of love and unity with all things and with the living energy of the universe. And we make this Despacho with deep joy and appreciation and generosity, and with appreciation we honor the interconnectedness, the interrelatedness, and the interdependence of all things. This is the sort of language that you might hear in a Despacho ceremony. Now, the actual Despacho offering is constructed on a large, usually a square piece of white paper or sometimes a cloth, which will later be folded and bound with colored string, often yellow or gold string. And so the paper is laid out flat, and people will sit around and then place many sacred symbolic objects onto the paper, and these will get arrayed in a very intricate pattern. Like it looks like a mandala you'd see in Buddhism. And each of these objects, of course, has symbolic meaning, and different aspects of the ceremony will emphasize certain things. You'll see objects from nature, like shells and seeds, and coca leaves are quite often used because they're seen as sacred, and flowers are very common in a despacho. They might use grains, which symbolize gratitude for abundance and a sustenance and a good harvest, and the abundance of the Mother Earth, for example, is symbolized by grains or produce that symbols of produce that we've harvested from the fields. Of course, the Panchamama is seen as supporting everything that we do, so they cultivate a great deal of reverence and devotion for the Divine Mother. And despachos can also include symbols of wealth. I've seen those little gold foiled chocolate coins used in a despacho, where people are expressing gratitude for the abundance in their lives, or they may include things like colored wool, which might symbolize rainbows, or they'll even use sugar or brightly colored candies, which represent or can represent the sweetness of our lives, of our love, the sweetness of our good relationships with one another. So despachos are often a very positive act. We can also use the despacho ceremonies to seek guidance and during periods of transition in our lives, to express our concerns and to seek guidance. And so as each object then is placed in the despacho, the shaman and the participants will infuse it with their prayers, their intentions, and the energies that they wish to offer to the spirits. If they're expressing a concern, they are giving this over to the divine so that the divine will take care of it. And they'll often take the leaves, 3 coca leaves, and blow on the object to infuse the object with their intentions and their life force. So, of course, then they set this in the despacho. This is a form of, it's a meditative process. It's a form of prayer, and participants are focusing on feelings of gratitude, on healing. Physical healing is another thing they can seek in a despacho ceremony, and they express very specific intentions in this way. And this is a way of giving over to making our intentions known and giving over our concerns to the divine. Now, eventually the despacho is decorated with flowers and petals and those little prayer bundles that are made from the leaves, and many other offerings, shells, for example, brightly colored sweets, as I mentioned. And as I said, it's very important for each participant to breathe their intentions into each of the ingredients that goes into the despacho, so that it becomes fueled with their prayers and their aspirations and their hopes and their dreams and their expressions of gratitude and respect. Then towards the end of the ceremony, the final objects that are added to the despacho before it's closed are meant to serve as reminders for us to be of service to others, to one another in our daily lives, and to give freely of the best of ourselves to others, and to give with joy and gratitude and love. This is the same kind of virtues that you see everywhere in the world. come to the fore in a despacho ceremony in the high Andes. Once this despacho then is complete, it's very carefully and methodically folded into usually a square bundle, and it's represents a gift to the divine, and it's sealed with love and with intentionality. It's sprinkled with water and sacred herbs, sometimes alcohol, and the leader will usually take the despacho bundle and place it reverently on participants' heads. It might be drawn down the front and back of the body in order to purify the physical and subtle bodies. And then once it's blessed and it's done its job and it's carrying our intentions and our wishes and our well wishes and our gratitudes and our feelings, then the despacho will be usually burned in the fire, which is done to release our prayers and our intentions into the sacred realms, into the heavens. Or if a fire is impossible, it may be buried in the Mother Earth, which will plant our intentions in the divine earth. Or it can be offered in a flowing stream or a river, and each of these acts is done with full trust that the messages and the intentions and the prayers that the despacho contains will be transmitted to the divine and will be acted upon. It's an act of faith. People they have faith that their intentions that they give over, their hopes, their wishes that they give over to the divine will be acted upon. So that's another aspect of offerings. There's an aspect of faith, of trust involved in this. If you ever have the opportunity to participate in despacho, I hope you will take advantage of it, because it's a powerful, deeply personal, and very meaningful ritual. It's an expression of reverence, as I said. It's a reminder of our role in the cosmic order and as caretakers of the natural order of the earth, and our responsibility for maintaining balance, for expressing love and warm-hearted loving kindness and harmony in the world, rather than discord and enmity and anger and all of the negative and destructive. We have a role to play in maintaining a balance in the social order and the order of things. And a despacho ceremony is a way for us to take responsibility for our actions and to live up to our responsibilities. It's a prayer for balance, then, for balance between ourselves and all other beings, between giving and receiving. It's a prayer for balance with a focus on nature and on the Mother Earth and the universe as a whole. Finally, it's a prayer for balance with the needs for all sentient beings. It's an expression of hope for the benefit of all beings. So by participating in the ceremony and helping to construct the despacho, we deepen our connections with the divine, and we reaffirm our place in the intricate web of life, in the vast, interdependent web of existence. Now, this video has already gone very long, and I was hoping to discuss mandala offerings in Tibetan Buddhism. You'll find mandala offerings in various schools of Tibetan Buddhism. The one I'm most familiar with is mandala offering from the Nundro preliminary practices and the Nyingma tradition. And I was going to discuss water bowl offerings in Tibetan Buddhism, very powerful. And I think I just better wait and discuss these offering practices in the next video. They're profound. They encompass so many of the aspects of important aspects that I've discussed in many of the videos that I've had in this channel in the past, and it brings these offerings, practices in Tibetan Buddhism bring many of these elements together and infuse them into one practice. And as I mentioned, they're incredibly powerful and deeply meaningful, and they hold deep symbolic significance. And so I think I should just devote a whole separate video to them. So this has gone on longer than I intended it to. Thank you for sticking around to the end. Thank you for watching. I also want to thank you for supporting the channel. I appreciate each and every one of you subscribers to the channel. I hope that you will follow these practices, integrate them into your life, and make a commitment to becoming a good and better person. And I also hope that you'll subscribe to support the channel. Tell your friends about us. Be sure to like the video if you found value in it. And I'll look forward to seeing you here again next time for our next video right here on Journey of Self-Awareness. Bye-bye.